The lightning split the sky above Trinidad, Colorado, and Adelaide Wright knew she had made a terrible mistake climbing up here alone. Rain hammered down in sheets so thick she could barely see her own hands gripping the rocky outcrop. The ledge she had scrambled onto was perhaps 3 feet wide, jutting out from the cliff face like a broken tooth. Below her, somewhere in that swirling gray darkness, the ground waded 70 feet down. Maybe more. She could not tell anymore. The storm had rolled in from the mountains with a fury that seemed almost personal, transforming what should have been a simple afternoon ride into a nightmare of thunder and wind and her own foolish pride. She pressed her back against the wet stone, feeling the cold seep through her riding jacket. Her horse had spooked at the first crack of thunder, throwing her near the base of these red rocks before bolting back toward town. Adelaide had climbed up seeking shelter in what she thought was a cave entrance, only to find herself trapped on this miserable ledge when the rain started in earnest. The rocks below were too slick now, the handholds invisible through the downpour. Every time she tried to look down to find a path, vertigo seized her stomach and pulled. She was 22 years old, and she was going to die on this ledge because she had been too stubborn to listen to her father when he said a storm was coming. The wind screamed past, trying to pluck her from her perch. Adelaide closed her eyes and thought about her mother, dead these 5 years. She thought about her father, who ran the general store in Trinidad, and who would blame himself for this. She thought about all the things she had wanted to do with her life, all the places she had wanted to see beyond this Colorado town, where she had spent every day of her existence. Then she heard something impossible through the storm, a voice, a man's voice calling out, "Hello, can you hear me?" Adelaide's eyes snapped open. She tried to shout back, but her throat was raw from screaming earlier when she first realized she was stuck. Only a hoarse croak emerged. She swallowed hard, tasting rain, and tried again. "I'm here. I'm on the ledge." Silence, except for the storm. She wondered if she had imagined it, if desperation had conjured phantom rescuers from the thunder itself. Then the voice came again, closer now and definitely real. "Stay right where you are. I'm coming up." As if she had anywhere else to go. Despite everything, Adelaide felt a wild laugh bubble up in her chest. She clamped down on it, afraid if she started laughing she might not stop, might tip right over into hysteria and then over the edge itself. Minutes crawled by like hours. The rain did not let up. Lightning continued to carve the sky into jagged pieces. Adelaide counted her heartbeats and tried not to think about the drop below. She focused instead on the voice, on the knowledge that someone was out there, someone who had somehow seen her or heard her and was crazy enough to climb up in this weather. Then a hand appeared over the lip of the ledge to her right, followed by a second hand, and then a man pulled himself up with a grunt of effort. He was soaked through, his dark hair plastered to his skull, his clothes heavy with water. Even in the dim gray light of the storm, Adelaide could see he was young, perhaps her own age or a few years older, with a strong jaw and eyes that locked onto hers immediately. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rough but steady. "I think so," Adelaide managed. "Just stuck." He positioned himself carefully on the ledge, testing the rock beneath him. There was perhaps 6 feet of space between them. "My name's Preston Vance," he said. "I've been ranching up north of town, saw your horse run past and figured someone was in trouble." "Adelaide Wright," she said, because it seemed important to exchange names, to be actual people to each other in this moment. "Thank you for coming." Preston edged a bit closer, moving with careful deliberation. "Don't thank me yet. We still need to get you down from here." He looked past her, assessing the cliff face and the ledge. "How long have you been up here? An hour maybe. I lost track." "Your hands and feet still working, no numbness." Adelaide flexed her fingers, which ached from gripping the rock. Everything works. I'm just terrified to move. Preston nodded, rainwater streaming down his face. That's honest. Fear's not a bad thing right now. It'll keep you careful. He shifted his weight and extended one hand toward her. But we can't stay up here. This ledge isn't stable. You see that crack running through the stone right where you're standing? Adelaide looked down despite herself and saw it, a dark line splitting the rock beneath her boots. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. That wasn't there before. It might have been, just harder to see when it was dry. Water gets in those cracks and the rock weakens. We need to move, but we need to move smart. Preston kept his hand extended, steady despite the wind that tried to push them both off the mountain. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Can you do that? Yes. Good. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to talk you through every single movement, every single step. You're not going to look down. You're going to look at me, or you're going to look at the rock face, but never down. Understood? Adelaide swallowed hard. Understood. Before we climb down, I need you to come over here, away from that crack. The rock is more solid where I am. Do you trust me? Did she? She did not know this man, this Preston Vance from north of town. But he had climbed up here in a storm to help her, and his eyes were clear and calm despite the chaos of wind and rain around them. What choice did she have anyway? I trust you, she said. All right. I want you to turn your body so you're facing the cliff wall. Keep your hands flat against the stone. Feel how solid it is. That's your anchor. The rock is your friend right now. Adelaide turned slowly, her palms pressing against the wet stone. It was rough and real under her hands, and that helped somehow, made her feel less like she was about to float away into the storm. Perfect, Preston said, his voice a steady thread through the thunder. Now, small steps. Slide your right foot toward me just a few inches. Don't lift it, just slide it. She did as he said. Her boots scraped against stone, finding purchase. Excellent. Now the left foot, same thing. Slide, grip, breathe. Adelaide moved in tiny increments, Preston coaching her through each one. The crack in the rock seemed to yawn wider behind her, though that might have been her imagination. She kept her focus on Preston's voice, on the instructions he gave with such certainty. You're doing great, Adelaide, just a little more. That's it. Then his hand closed around her wrist, strong and sure, and Preston pulled her toward the more stable section of the ledge. Adelaide stumbled against him, and for a moment they were pressed close together, both breathing hard. She could feel his heart beating fast like hers, and realized he had been just as afraid as she was, had simply hidden it better. Thank you, she whispered. Preston's other hand came up to steady her shoulder. We're not out of this yet, but we will be, I promise you that. Lightning struck somewhere close enough that the crack of it made Adelaide jump. Preston held her steady. Hey, look at me, look right at me. She did. His eyes were brown, she realized, dark brown, almost black in this light. We're going to climb down together. I'll go first so I can guide your feet to the right holds. You follow exactly where I go. The route's tricky, but it's not impossible. I came up it, so I know we can go down it. You just have to trust me and trust yourself. Can you do that? Adelaide felt something settle inside her, a core of determination that pushed back against the fear. She had not survived this long on this ledge just to give up now. Yes, tell me what to do. Preston released her and turned to study the cliff face. The rain made everything harder to see, but he seemed to have the route memorized. I'm going to climb down about 10 feet. When I tell you to move, you're going to lower yourself over the edge here. There's a foothold about 2 feet down. You'll feel it with your right foot. Don't rush it. Take your time finding it. All right. He gave her one more long look, as if memorizing her face, and then he was over the edge. Adelaide watched him descend with practiced ease, his body moving with a confidence that came from years of hard work and physical labor. He was a rancher, he had said. She could see it in the breadth of his shoulders, the strength in his arms. "Okay," his voice came from below. "Your turn. Remember, right foot first, 2 feet down." Adelaide took a deep breath and lowered herself over the edge. For a terrible moment she hung there, scrabbling for the foothold Preston had promised. Her boots slipped once, twice, and panic flared white-hot in her chest. "It's there, Adelaide. A little more to your right. There, you've got it." And she did. Her boot found solid stone and the panic receded. She was doing this. She was actually climbing down. "Excellent. Now your left foot. There's another hold at the same level, about a foot to the left." They descended in stages, Preston always below her, always talking. He told her where to put her hands, where to find the next foothold. When she slipped, he was there to catch her boot and guide it to safety. When she froze, paralyzed by fear, he talked to her about his ranch, about the cattle he raised and the horses he trained, filling the space with words until she could move again. "I've got a bay mare," he said as Adelaide lowered herself another few feet. "Prettiest thing you ever saw, but mean as a snake. Took me 6 months to break her, and even now she'll try to bite me if I'm not paying attention. Left hand up about 6 inches. There's a good grip there." "Why keep her if she's mean?" Adelaide asked, finding the grip he described. "Because she's also the smartest horse I've ever worked with, and sometimes the things worth having are the ones that challenge you. Right foot down now, careful, that rock is loose." Adelaide tested the stone carefully before trusting her weight to it. "That sounds like a metaphor for something." She heard Preston laugh, a surprised sound. "Maybe it is. You're doing great, by the way, halfway down." Halfway. The word gave her strength. They could do this. The rain began to ease as they descended, the storm finally starting to exhaust itself. Adelaide's arms burned with effort, and her legs shook, but she kept moving. Preston kept talking, kept guiding, his presence below her a constant reassurance. When her feet finally touched flat ground, Adelaide nearly collapsed. Her knees gave out and Preston caught her, his arms coming around her to hold her steady. "I've got you," he said. "You're safe now. You did it." Adelaide buried her face against his chest and shook. She was not crying, not exactly, but she could not seem to stop trembling. The fear that she had held at bay during the climb came flooding back now that it was over, and she clung to Preston like he was the only solid thing in the world. He held her and let her shake. His hand came up to cradle the back of her head, protective and gentle. "You're all right," he murmured. "You're safe. I've got you." Eventually, Adelaide's breathing steadied. She pulled back enough to look up at Preston, really look at him for the first time. He was handsome in a rugged way, with a day's worth of stubble on his jaw and small scars on his hands that spoke of a life lived outdoors. But it was his eyes that caught her, the kindness in them, the quiet strength. "You saved my life," she said. Preston shook his head. "You saved yourself. I just gave you directions. Don't downplay it. You climbed up in a storm because you thought someone needed help. Most people would have just kept riding." He smiled then, a small quirk of his lips. "I'm not most people, I guess." They stood there in the rain, which had diminished to a light drizzle. Around them, the landscape emerged from the storm's gray curtain. The red rocks of the cliff face, the scrub brush, the mountains in the distance. It was all familiar to Adelaide, the country she had known her whole life, but it looked different now somehow. Sharper, more vivid. "We should get you back to town," Preston said, though he made no move to let go of her. "Your family will be worried. My father, yes. It's just him and me." Adelaide stepped back reluctantly, immediately missing the warmth of Preston's arms. "My horse ran off. I suppose I'll be walking." "Not in those wet clothes. You'll catch your death. My horse is just over that rise. We can ride double back to Trinidad." They walked together through the wet grass, Adelaide's legs still unsteady beneath her. Preston matched his pace to hers, staying close in case she stumbled. His horse, a tall chestnut gelding, waited patiently where Preston had ground-tied him. "This is Rusty," Preston said, patting the horse's neck. "He's steady, won't spook, even in a storm." Adelaide reached out to touch the gelding's soft nose. "Thank you for being steady, Rusty." Preston swung up into the saddle and extended his hand down to Adelaide. She took it, and he pulled her up behind him with easy strength. She settled onto the horse's back, acutely aware that she needed to hold onto Preston to avoid falling off. Her arms went around his waist, and she felt the solid warmth of him through his wet shirt. "Hold tight," Preston said, and urged Rusty into a walk. They rode in silence for a while, the horse picking his way carefully over the uneven ground. The storm clouds were breaking up overhead, letting through shafts of late afternoon sunlight that turned the wet landscape golden. Adelaide rested her cheek against Preston's back and felt something strange unfold in her chest, something warm and unexpected. She barely knew this man, and yet she felt safe with him in a way that went beyond the simple fact that he had helped her off the ledge. It was something about his steady presence, his calm competence, the way he had talked her through her fear without dismissing it. "Tell me about your ranch," Adelaide said, wanting to hear his voice again. Preston shifted slightly in the saddle. "It's not much yet. 100 acres up in the hills north of town. I've been building it up for 3 years now, ever since I saved enough to buy the land. Got about 50 head of cattle and a dozen horses. It's hard work, but it's mine. That means something. It sounds wonderful." "It's lonely sometimes," Preston admitted. "Just me out there most days. I come into town for supplies every couple of weeks, but otherwise it's just me and the animals. No family. Parents died when I was 16. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I worked as a ranch hand for other people until I could afford my own place." He paused. "What about you? You mentioned your father." "He runs the general store in Trinidad. Wright's General Store, if you've been there." "I have. Good man, your father. Honest prices, doesn't try to cheat cowboys who don't know better." Pride warmed Adelaide's voice. "He's the best man I know. My mother died when I was 17, cancer. Since then it's been just the two of us running the store." "I'm sorry about your mother." "Thank you." "It gets easier, but you never really stop missing them, do you?" "No," Preston agreed quietly. "You don't." They rode on, sharing the comfortable silence of two people who understood loss. Adelaide tightened her arms around Preston's waist, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. She thought about how strange life was, how this morning she had woken up in her narrow bed above the general store with no idea that by afternoon she would be trapped on a cliff, and by evening she would be riding through the Colorado hills with a rancher named Preston Vance, feeling things she had no name for. Trinidad came into view as they crested a low hill. The town was small but growing, with a main street lined with wooden buildings and houses spreading out in neat rows beyond. Preston guided Rusty down the muddy main street toward the general store, which occupied a prominent corner lot. Before they reached it, the door flew open and Adelaide's father came running out. Thomas Wright was a solid man in his 50s, with gray threading through his brown hair and worry etched deep in his face. "Adelaide, thank God." He reached up to help her down from the horse, pulling her into a fierce hug. "When your horse came back without you, I thought the worst. I was just about to organize a search party." "I'm all right, Papa. I got caught in the storm and trapped on the rocks out by Raton Pass. This is Preston Vance." He climbed up and helped me down. Thomas turned to Preston, who had dismounted and stood holding Rusty's reins. The older man's eyes were bright with emotion. "You saved my daughter's life." Preston looked uncomfortable with the praise. "She's brave, did most of the work herself." "That's not true," Adelaide protested. "Papa, I would still be up there if not for him, or I'd be at the bottom broken." Thomas seized Preston's hand and shook it vigorously. "I don't know how to thank you, son. I don't know what I'd do if something happened to Adelaide. She's all I have left in this world." "No thanks necessary, sir. I'm just glad I was in the right place at the right time. You'll have dinner with us," Thomas insisted. "Tonight. It's the least we can do." Preston hesitated, and Adelaide found herself holding her breath, hoping he would say yes. She was not ready for him to ride out of her life just yet. "I don't want to impose," Preston said. "It's not an imposition if you're invited," Adelaide said quickly. "Please, I'd like to repay you somehow, even if it's just a hot meal." Preston's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, something electric and unspoken. "All right, thank you, I'd be honored." Thomas clapped Preston on the shoulder. "Good man. Come inside, both of you. Adelaide, you need to get into dry clothes before you catch pneumonia. I'll make up the stove and get some coffee going." Adelaide followed her father into the store, glancing back once at Preston. He was tending to his horse, loosening the saddle girth, but he looked up as if he felt her gaze. Their eyes met again, and Adelaide felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with embarrassment, and everything to do with the way her heart had started beating faster. She had never believed in love at first sight. It seemed like something from the dime novels she sometimes read, romantic nonsense that had no place in the real world. But standing there in her father's store, soaking wet and exhausted, Adelaide wondered if perhaps she had been wrong about that. The apartment above the store was small but comfortable, with a sitting room, kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. Adelaide changed into a dry dress, a simple blue cotton that was practical but flattering. She took a moment to look at herself in the mirror, at her brown hair hanging damp around her shoulders and her gray eyes that seemed brighter somehow than they had this morning. "You're being silly," she told her reflection. "He rescued you. That doesn't mean anything beyond simple human decency." But her reflection did not look convinced. Downstairs, she found Preston and her father in the sitting room, deep in conversation. Preston had draped his wet jacket over a chair to dry, and he sat forward in his seat, engaged and animated as he talked with Thomas about cattle prices and the railroad expansion. He looked up when Adelaide entered, and his eyes lingered on her in a way that made her pulse quicken. Dinner was simple but hearty. Thomas made stew from the pot he kept simmering on the stove, and Adelaide sliced fresh bread from the loaf she had baked that morning. They ate at the small table by the window overlooking the main street, and the conversation flowed easily. Preston told them more about his ranch, about his plans to expand his herd and maybe start breeding horses specifically for ranch work. Thomas talked about the store, about the town's growth, and how Trinidad was poised to become an important stop on the railroad line. Adelaide mostly listened, content to watch Preston as he spoke, noting the way his hands moved to illustrate a point, the way his whole face lit up when he talked about his land. "You should come visit the ranch sometime," Preston said, and it took Adelaide a moment to realize he was speaking to her specifically. "Both of you, I mean, but Adelaide especially, since she seems interested in horses." "I am," Adelaide said, though she had not mentioned horses specifically. "I used to have my own mare, but she got too old and we had to put her down last year. I haven't replaced her yet. I've got a couple of young mares that might suit you. Not broken yet, but gentle enough. Could probably get one ready for riding in a month or so." Preston hesitated, then added, "I could teach you if you wanted. How to work with a green horse, I mean." "I'd like that," Adelaide said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised her. Thomas looked between them with knowing eyes but said nothing. After dinner, he excused himself to do inventory in the store, leaving Preston and Adelaide alone in the sitting room. The sun was setting, painting the room in shades of orange and gold. "Your father's a good man," Preston said, standing by the window. Adelaide joined him there, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "He is. He's been everything to me since my mother died. Father, mother, business partner, best friend. That's a heavy burden for one person to carry. Sometimes I worry about him. About what will happen when I marry and move away. He'll be alone." Preston glanced at her. "Are you engaged?" "No, there's no one." Adelaide felt bold suddenly, reckless in a way she had not been before this afternoon. Nearly dying did that to a person, she supposed. It made you realize that life was too short to be cautious all the time. There never has been, really. No one in Trinidad has ever interested me that way. That's surprising. "Why?" Preston turned to face her fully. "Because you're beautiful and brave, and any man would be lucky to know you." Adelaide's breath caught. In the golden light of sunset, Preston looked like something from a painting, all strong lines and warm shadows. "You barely know me. I know you didn't panic on that ledge, even though you were terrified. I know you pushed through your fear to climb down. I know you love your father and you care about horses and you have kind eyes." Preston reached out slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted to. When she did not, his hand came up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "That's enough to know you're someone special." "Preston," Adelaide whispered, and then she could not say anything else because he was leaning in, his intent clear in his eyes, and she was rising on her toes to meet him. The kiss was soft, questioning, achingly gentle. Preston's lips were warm against hers, and he kissed her like she was something precious, something that might break if he was not careful. Adelaide's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart beating fast beneath her palms. When they pulled apart, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I first saw you on that ledge." Adelaide laughed, breathless. "Really? When I was soaking wet and terrified, even then, especially then. You looked fierce and vulnerable all at once, and I thought you were the most remarkable woman I'd ever seen." "This is crazy," Adelaide said, though she made no move to step away. "We just met." "I know, but sometimes things are right even when they're fast. My father always said that when he met my mother, he knew within an hour that he was going to marry her. They had 30 good years together before the fever took them. Not long enough, but good years." Preston's hands came up to frame her face. "I'm not saying I know anything for certain. But I know I want to see you again. I know I want to learn everything about you. Is that all right?" "Yes," Adelaide said and kissed him again, less gently this time, with more sureness. They sat together on the sofa as the light faded from the room, talking in low voices about everything and nothing. Preston told her about growing up as an only child, about learning to ride before he could properly walk. Adelaide told him about her dreams of seeing the ocean someday, about her love of reading and how she sometimes felt trapped by the smallness of Trinidad. "I'd take you to the ocean," Preston said. "If you wanted, maybe once the ranch is more established. San Francisco's supposed to be something to see. You do that. I do a lot of things for you." Adelaide Wright. It was late when Preston finally stood to leave. Thomas had tactfully stayed downstairs, and Adelaide walked Preston out to where Rusty was tied at the hitching post. "Come visit the ranch," Preston said, taking her hand. "Tomorrow, if you can. I want to show you my land, the horses. I want you to see what I'm building." "I'll come," Adelaide promised. "I'll ask Papa if I can take the afternoon off." Preston lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. a gesture that was both old-fashioned and impossibly romantic. "Until tomorrow, then." Adelaide watched him ride away into the darkness, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched. She floated back inside to find her father waiting in the sitting room, a knowing smile on his face. "That's a good man, Adelaide. I know. Do you love him?" Adelaide considered the question seriously. Love seemed too strong a word for these fragile new feelings, but it was also the only word that seemed to fit. "I think I could, very easily." Thomas stood and hugged his daughter. "Then I'm happy for you. Life's too short to ignore something real when you find it. Your mother and I knew each other only 3 months before we married, and I never regretted a single day with her." 3 months. You never told me that. You never asked. Thomas kissed the top of her head. "Go see his ranch tomorrow. Get to know him. If he's the one, you'll know soon enough." Adelaide lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling and reliving every moment of the day. The terror of the ledge, Preston's voice calling to her through the storm, the climb down, the kiss in the golden light. It felt like a dream, too vivid and intense to be real life. But it was real. Preston was real, and tomorrow she would see him again. The next afternoon, Adelaide borrowed her father's horse and rode north out of Trinidad. Preston had given her directions to his ranch, and she followed them carefully, excitement building with every mile. The land here was beautiful, rolling hills covered with grass and wildflowers, red rock formations jutting up like ancient bones. The ranch came into view around a bend in the trail. It was modest but well kept, with a small house, a barn, and several corrals. Adelaide could see cattle grazing on the hillside and horses in one of the corrals. As she rode closer, Preston emerged from the barn, and the smile that broke across his face when he saw her made Adelaide's heart sing. "You came," he said, helping her down from the saddle. "Of course I came." Preston kept his hands on her waist a moment longer than necessary, his eyes searching hers. "I wasn't sure. Thought maybe you'd have second thoughts in the daylight. Did you?" "Not even for a moment." He showed her everything, pride evident in his voice as he walked her through his operation. The cattle were healthy, the horses were beautiful, and the land stretched out in all directions, wild and free. Adelaide fell in love with it immediately, with the space and the silence and the way Preston belonged here so completely. In the barn, Preston introduced her to the bay mare he had mentioned on the cliff. The horse was indeed beautiful, with a coat like polished mahogany and intelligent eyes that watched Adelaide warily. "Her name's Juniper," Preston said. "She trusts me now, but it took a long time. She'd been mistreated before I got her." Adelaide approached slowly, letting the mare catch her scent. Who could mistreat something so lovely? Plenty of people don't see animals as anything more than tools, but they're more than that. They're partners if you treat them right. Preston moved to stand beside Adelaide, and together they stroked Juniper's neck until the mare relaxed. "I think she likes you. I like her too." They had lunch on the porch of Preston's house, simple sandwiches and cool water from the well. The view from the porch was spectacular, overlooking the valley below with the mountains rising in the distance. "I could sit here forever," Adelaide said. "I do, sometimes. Especially in the evenings when the sun's going down. It's the most peaceful thing in the world." Adelaide turned to look at Preston, studying his profile as he gazed out at his land. "You really love it here." "I do. This ranch, it's everything I've worked for, everything I want." He turned to meet her eyes. "Well, almost everything. What else do you want?" Preston reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Someone to share it with. I didn't realize how much I wanted that until yesterday, until you." Adelaide's throat felt tight. "Preston, we barely know each other." "Then let's fix that. Spend time with me. Let me court you properly. I'll come to town every few days. We can go riding, have dinner, talk. Give us a chance to see if this is real. And if it is real, then I'll ask your father for permission to marry you, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes." Adelaide leaned in and kissed him, soft and sweet in the afternoon sunlight. "I'd like that. The courting, I mean. Let's do it right." And they did. Over the next 3 months, Preston came to Trinidad twice a week without fail. He would arrive in the late afternoon, help Thomas at the store, and then take Adelaide for walks or rides out into the countryside. They talked about everything, learning each other's histories and dreams and fears. Preston met Adelaide's friends, and Adelaide learned the names of all Preston's horses and cattle. The town gossips noticed, of course. Trinidad was too small for a courtship to go unremarked, especially when it involved Adelaide Wright, who had never shown interest in any of the local men before. But the gossip was largely approving. Preston was hardworking and respectful, and it was clear to anyone with eyes that he adored Adelaide. Thomas watched the relationship develop with satisfaction. He liked Preston, liked the way the young man treated his daughter, liked the plans he talked about for the future. When Preston came to him in early September and asked for permission to marry Adelaide, Thomas gave it without hesitation. "You'll be good to her," Thomas said. It was not a question. "I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of her," Preston replied. Preston proposed on the cliff where they had met, on a clear autumn afternoon when the air was crisp and the aspens had turned gold. They rode out together, and Preston led Adelaide to the base of the rocks where he had first found her horse wandering. "I wanted to do this here," Preston said, taking both of her hands in his, "because this is where my life changed, where I found something I didn't even know I'd been looking for." "Preston," Adelaide said, tears already starting in her eyes. He dropped to one knee, pulling a ring from his pocket. It was simple, a single small diamond set in silver. "Adelaide Wright, I love you. I love your courage and your kindness and your laugh. I love the way you see the world like it's full of possibilities. I want to spend my life discovering all the things I'll come to love about you. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Adelaide said, pulling him to his feet so she could kiss him. "Yes, yes, yes." They married in October, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Trinidad. Adelaide wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and carried wildflowers from Preston's land. Thomas walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and Preston waited at the altar looking like he could not quite believe his good fortune. The whole town came to the wedding, and the celebration afterward lasted until well past dark. There was music and dancing and more food than they could possibly eat. Adelaide danced with her father, with Preston, with what felt like every man in Trinidad. But always she came back to Preston, to the solid warmth of his arms and the love in his eyes. They spent their wedding night at the ranch, in the house that was now Adelaide's home. Preston carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the sitting room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vance," he said. Adelaide looked around at the simple furnishings, the stone fireplace, the windows that looked out on the land she had come to love. "It's perfect." That night, Preston loved her with tenderness and passion, making her feel cherished and desired all at once. Adelaide had been nervous, but Preston was patient, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and wanted. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed, their bed now, and Adelaide felt a completeness she had never known before. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. Preston kissed her forehead. "I love you too, always." Life on the ranch was hard work, but Adelaide thrived on it. She learned to rope cattle and mend fences, to doctor sick animals and break young horses. Preston taught her everything, praising her when she succeeded and encouraging her when she struggled. They worked side by side through long days, and at night they fell into bed exhausted and content. Thomas visited often, riding out from town to have dinner with them and see how they were doing. He seemed lighter somehow without the weight of worrying about Adelaide, and he had started courting a widow who ran the boarding house in Trinidad. Adelaide was happy for him, happy that he would not be alone. Winter came hard that year, with snow piling up and temperatures dropping below zero. Preston and Adelaide spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other or just sitting in comfortable silence. Sometimes Preston would play the harmonica, old songs his father had taught him, and Adelaide would sing along in her clear soprano voice. It was during those long winter months that Adelaide realized she was pregnant. She told Preston one evening in February when the snow was falling soft outside the windows. "You're sure?" Preston asked, his hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "I'm sure." Preston pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy, Adelaide, I'm beyond happy. I'm terrified and excited and grateful all at once." He pulled back to look at her face. "How are you feeling? Are you all right?" "I'm fine. A little sick in the mornings, but otherwise fine." Preston became impossibly protective after that, trying to take on all the heavy work himself and constantly worrying about Adelaide overdoing it. She had to remind him repeatedly that she was pregnant, not made of glass. "Women have been having babies while working ranches for generations," she told him when he tried to stop her from mucking out a stall. "I'm strong, Preston. Trust me." "I do trust you. I just love you so much." Their son was born in late September, a year almost to the day after their wedding. The labor was long and hard, with only the doctor from town and Preston to help. Adelaide gripped Preston's hand and pushed, and finally, as the sun was setting, their baby came into the world with a lusty cry. "A boy," the doctor announced, placing the infant in Adelaide's arms. "Strong lungs on him." Adelaide looked down at her son, at his tiny, perfect face and dark hair. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Hello," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Preston leaned over, his own eyes wet. "He's beautiful. You're both beautiful." They named him Thomas, after Adelaide's father, and called him Tommy. He was a good baby, quick to smile and curious about everything. Preston was a devoted father, carrying Tommy everywhere and talking to him constantly, as if the infant could understand every word. Thomas Sr. visited often, delighting in his grandson. He brought gifts from town, toys and clothes and books for when Tommy was older. The widow, whose name was Margaret, came too, and Adelaide liked her immediately. They married the following spring, and suddenly Adelaide's small family had grown. The ranch prospered over the years. Preston's careful management and hard work paid off, and they were able to expand their herd and buy more land. Adelaide proved to have a gift for training horses, and people started coming from all over the region to buy horses she had worked with. 2 years after Tommy was born, Adelaide gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, for her red hair and sunny disposition. Then another son 3 years after that, Samuel, who was quiet and thoughtful like his grandfather. The house that had seemed spacious when it was just Adelaide and Preston became cramped with 3 children, so they added on, building more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Life was full and chaotic and wonderful. Adelaide would sometimes pause in the middle of a busy day, children playing around her and Preston working in the barn, and feel overwhelmed with gratitude. She thought about that day on the ledge, about how different her life would be if Preston had not come riding past. The children grew. Tommy became tall and strong like his father, passionate about the ranch, and determined to run it himself someday. Rose was spirited and clever, always getting into mischief but impossible to stay angry with. Samuel was the quiet one, content to spend hours reading or watching the clouds. Adelaide and Preston grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their struggles, as all couples did. There were lean years when the cattle prices dropped and money was tight. There was the summer when fever swept through the herd and they lost 20 head. There was the terrible winter when Rose got pneumonia and Adelaide and Preston took turns staying awake all night, watching over her until she finally recovered. But through it all, they had each other. Preston would pull Adelaide close on difficult nights and remind her that they had survived worse. Adelaide would make Preston laugh when he was discouraged, would believe in him when he doubted himself. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston took Adelaide back to the cliff where they had met. The children were with Thomas and Margaret for the weekend, giving them rare time alone. 10 years, Preston said, standing at the base of the rocks. Seems impossible. And also like forever, Adelaide added. Preston pulled her close, his arms around her waist. Do you remember what I said when I proposed? That I wanted to spend my life discovering all the things I'd come to love about you. I remember. I was right. Every year I find something new, some quality or quirk or habit that makes me love you more. Adelaide turned in his arms to face him. Like what? Like the way you hum when you're cooking. Like how you always check on the children one more time before you come to bed, even though they're all asleep. Like how fiercely you protect the people you love. Like how you still look at me sometimes like I'm the only man in the world. Preston kissed her softly. I could go on for hours. I love you, Adelaide said. More now than I did 10 years ago, more than I did yesterday. You're everything good in my life, Preston Vance. They made love that afternoon in the grass below the cliff, slow and sweet and full of tenderness. Afterward they lay together looking up at the sky, fingers interlaced. You ever regret it? Preston asked. Leaving town, living out here, all the hard work? Never. Not once. Adelaide rolled onto her side to look at him. This life, this ranch, our children, you. It's everything I never knew I wanted. Preston smiled and kissed her again. Good, because I'm planning on keeping you for at least another 50 years. Only 50? Well, I'm being conservative, don't want to seem greedy. Adelaide laughed, the sound echoing off the red rocks. Be greedy. I want forever. Then forever it is. The years continued to pass. Tommy grew into a fine young man and started courting a girl from town, a rancher's daughter named Emily who could ride as well as any man. Rose developed a passion for teaching and announced she wanted to open a school in Trinidad. Samuel discovered a talent for drawing and spent hours sketching the landscape and animals. Adelaide and Preston watched their children become adults with pride and a touch of melancholy. The house grew quieter as the children spent more time pursuing their own interests and dreams. But it also grew fuller in other ways, with Tommy's wedding bringing Emily into the family, with Rose's teaching bringing children to the ranch for lessons in the summer. When Adelaide was 45, a letter came from San Francisco. An old friend of her mother's had read about Adelaide's work with horses and wanted to commission her to train a string of horses for a wealthy client. The pay was extraordinary, and it would require Adelaide and Preston to spend 3 months in California. We should go, Preston said when Adelaide showed him the letter. You've always wanted to see the ocean. But the ranch, the children. Tommy and Emily can handle the ranch. They practically run it already. And the children are grown, Adelaide. Rose is teaching. Samuel's talking about going to art school in Denver. We've earned a little adventure, so they went. They took the train west. watching the landscape change from high plains to mountains to desert and finally to the green coastal valleys of California. San Francisco was everything Adelaide had imagined and more, a bustling city full of life and noise and possibilities. But what Adelaide loved most was the ocean. The first time she saw it, she stood on the beach and cried. The vastness of it, the endless blue stretching to the horizon, the rhythm of the waves, it overwhelmed her in the best way. Preston held her hand and watched her fall in love with the sea. "Was it worth the wait?" he asked. "Yes, though it's better because you're here with me." They worked hard in California, Adelaide training the horses with her usual patience and skill. But they also played, exploring the city and the coast, eating food they had never tried before, seeing sights they had only read about. They went to the theater and walked through museums. They danced in fancy ballrooms and kissed on moonlit beaches. "This is like a second honeymoon," Adelaide said one night as they walked along the wharf. Preston squeezed her hand. "Every day with you is a honeymoon. You're incorrigible, you love it." "I do." They returned to the ranch in late fall, tanned and full of stories. The children gathered to hear about their adventures, and Adelaide showed them shells she had collected from the beach and told them about the strange beauty of the ocean. Life settled back into its familiar rhythms. The ranch continued to thrive. Tommy and Emily had their first child, a girl they named Adelaide after her grandmother. Rose's school grew, and Samuel left for Denver but wrote long letters about his studies and the art he was creating. Adelaide and Preston grew old together. Preston's hair turned gray, and Adelaide's followed. They both moved a bit slower, ached a bit more in the mornings. But they still worked the ranch, still rode out to check on cattle and horses, still sat on the porch in the evenings and watched the sun set over their land. On their 30th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Preston stood and raised his glass. 30 years ago," he said, "I was riding home in a storm and saw a riderless horse. I followed it and found a woman trapped on a ledge, and that woman changed my life. Adelaide, you've given me everything. Love, family, purpose, joy. Every single day with you has been a gift." Adelaide stood and kissed her husband to the applause and cheers of their family. "You saved my life," she said, "and then you gave me a life worth saving." They lived long and well. Preston made it to 75 before his heart finally gave out peacefully in his sleep with Adelaide beside him. She grieved deeply but without bitterness. They had been given so much time, so much love. Adelaide lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She continued to work with horses until the very end, training and teaching with the same patience and skill she had always possessed. On her 80th birthday, Tommy took her back to the cliff where she and Preston had met. Adelaide stood at the base of the rocks, older now but still strong, and looked up at the ledge where she had once been trapped. It seemed impossibly high, impossibly dangerous. How had she survived that climb down? How had Preston found the courage to climb up? "Love," she said aloud, answering her own question. "Love makes us brave." Tommy put his arm around his mother. "Dad always said that finding you was the best thing that ever happened to him." "He was the best thing that ever happened to me," Adelaide replied. She smiled, looking up at the clear blue sky. "But we were both wrong. The best thing was what we built together. The family, the life, all of it. That was the best thing." Adelaide lived to see great-grandchildren born, to see the ranch continue to thrive under Tommy's management, to see Rose's school become a permanent fixture in Trinidad, to see Samuel's art displayed in galleries. She lived fully until the very end, and when she finally passed, peacefully in her sleep like Preston before her, she did so with a smile on her face. They buried her next to Preston on a hill overlooking the ranch with a simple stone that read, Adelaide Wright Vance, 1866–1946. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She was brave, and so their story ended as all stories must, with death but also with legacy. The ranch continued, passed down through generations. The family grew and spread, but they always remembered their roots, remembered the story of how Adelaide was trapped on a ledge in a storm and Preston climbed up and talked her down to safety, and how that moment of courage and connection had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime and created something that would endure long after they were gone. In Trinidad, people still tell the story. They point out the cliff to visitors, show them where Adelaide Wright was trapped and Preston Vance saved her. But the real story, the important story, is not about the rescue. It is about what came after. About two people who found each other in the most unlikely way and chose to build a life together. About love that endured through hardship and joy, through loss and gain, through all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that make up a human life. That is the story worth telling. That is the story worth remembering.